Hello again, and welcome to day 4 of the Universal Model Exploration Project. Now, today I thought we'd do something quite different because I did not work on it today, but there's still a lot that can be done even without working on it directly. So today I would like to read maybe a chapter or two, paper or two from the actual 70-page kind of book I wrote. Now, little preface, little warning to you academics out there, if any of you are listening. This paper is not thoroughly researched. It sources often tend to be fiction or other things, but more importantly, what this paper is about is how I came about to working on the model and the general concepts and ideas that need to be developed. So it's more about identifying general patterns in the world that we should look towards and being open to engineering and prototyping those. So let's begin. The Universal Model by Jesse Harmander, edition number 1, February 2022. Almost been a whole year. So in the paper, there are 7 subpapers, which is the basics of the Universal Model, the development of the Universal Model, consciousness in the Universal Model, the Universal Model as an analysis tool, the Universal Model's future use, the Universal Model's impact on society, and the process of creating the Universal Model. So, to kind of make this look better too, I'll try and move the paper right here so I'm like kind of looking at both the camera and the screen. Who knows how well that's gonna work, but anyways, maybe I'll give some commentary while I read too. Because a lot of things have changed and a lot hasn't. And I think the important part will be identifying what hasn't changed and building off that. So, let's begin. The Universal Model is a system of philosophies. Oh, my bad. This is the basics of the Universal Model. I wrote this on February 21st, paper 1 of 7. So, the Universal Model is a system of philosophies, math, and concepts that organize all aspects of the universe into a single complex pattern. To understand the model, I split the ideas into 6 categories in this order: time, interactions, apertures, emergence, life, and consciousness. And then that leads back to time. So, then, the category of consciousness wraps back around related to time. Pause. I gotta try and stop. I will try and not give commentary in the middle of it because my commentary would likely just be similar to what I've already written. That's funny. So, as of now, the Universal Model is subject to change. These 6 categories may be too broad and must be split up, or too specific. These 6 categories may be too broad and must be split up, or be too specific and absorbed by other categories. In all likelihood, these 6 categories have no order. However, to lay a well-understood framework, the hexagonal structure of the model is a good starting reference for future iterations. The categories of the UM do not stand alone. They work together to form other universal concepts, such as novelty, entropy, evolution, hierarchies, energy, chaos and order, truth, love, power, and more. When combined and studied, the 6 pillars of the model make a comprehensive model of any system, subject, life form, you name it. If it exists, the Universal Model can and will model it. Why would we need such a tool? We live in one singular universe with many deeply challenging scientific and philosophical questions. I believe the answers to these questions are all in context with each other. The Universal Model's ability to analyze anything will give necessary context to solving these pressing challenges. The Universal Model started in search of an answer to one question: what is consciousness? A simple phrase with the most complex answer. As I studied consciousness more, I learned the solution lay in the processes of anything. Using math, I came upon potential solutions. There were hypotheses related to time, chaos, order, politics, biology, and too many subjects that started intertwining. I dared to delve into the realm of metaphysics with solutions arising left and right, and as time progressed, I realized I had created something much more: a model of how everything in the universe we inhabit functions, the Universal Model. So, let's move on to the pillars of the Universal Model. How did I develop the concepts to aim the UM's focus? I chose to focus on what we feel intrinsically in our lives. I had a hunch that evolution has primed our brains over millions of years to discern reality. Since our brains are excellent in categorizing and developing the world, I thought to start with the basics. There were two fundamental truths I came across. One, I am conscious and I experience things. And two, I feel a flow of time. If you're reading this consciously, then number one applies to you. If, by a matter of fact, I'm the only conscious mind and the universe is a simulation, consciousness still exists in some form as me. The second argument that time must exist is that if time were static, no thought could exist since the neurons cannot fire. Thus, since I am thinking, time exists in some form, whether in free will or determinism. Therefore, I started with time as the first pillar. Accidentally spilled water. I spill a lot. Let's move on to time. So, I love this quote. Time is the ruler of everything. Little side note, parentheses. I got that from my favorite band. Without time, we do not have interactions, movement, thoughts, anything. Without time, the universe would be a still image of infinite order, and nothing could ever happen. We can describe time as the fourth dimension that we continually pass through as three-dimensional creatures. Surprisingly, time became way more elusive as I researched further and experimented with the mathematics. Our conscious experiences and time intertwined in weird ways, where some types of minds may experience the world slower or faster. They are so intertwined that even an entirely still universe of infinite order may contain time flows perpendicular to frozen dimensions of space. These statements may sound crazy and confusing, but thus is the nature of time. And time is more explored in paper 3, I think it is, Consciousness in the Universal Model. Side note, in the recent physics that I've been working with the past 3 months, time got even weirder, where there are probably two time dimensions that collide to make our consciousness and such, and that run the physics of our universe, assuming that our universe needs a calculator. And that will be for a future video. So, next up, category number 2, interactions. The most basic concept besides time is interactions. Interactions can happen on any scale, between any system, object, node, particle, organization, and etc. Without interactions, particles would not bounce off each other, people would not talk, and gravity would not be possible, since gravity is a description of an interaction, a force. Interactions are next in line categorically because time gives rise to interactions. If time were still, then nothing could interact. Thus, interactions are next in the hexagonal loop. So we got time, now interactions. Interactions describe time flow, how different objects interact throughout the timeline, and connect various time flows to each other. The concept of timelines, time trees, and evolution is described later. Chiefly, the other patterns of the universal model cannot exist if their objects and systems cannot interact with each other. The idea is that something as basic as interactions are highly metaphysical. The deep metaphysical meaning of the universal model's design and field of study gives way to its usefulness as an analysis tool. So, now a note on interactions. Recently, when I've been dealing with definitions of stuff, the hexagonal models start to break down, which I predicted it would, because it was just a starting point. So now, they're still key, but I feel like the definition is going to get a bit more nuanced with this next category, apertures. There's some sub definitions in them that might start mixing around. So now let's move on. That can be for future videos. So, third category, apertures. Aperture is the most contested category right now. Right now is in 2022. It's a bit different now. The name is odd since it represents two intertwined concepts, chaos/order, and energy. I chose the word aperture as an homage to the game Portal 2 and its use of apertures in cameras. If interactions describe time, then apertures describe interactions. An aperture in a camera focuses light to a specific size, constraining the amount of light captured and the energy captured. I like the word aperture because it can contain the concept of chaos and order and energy, where you have an aperture of an interaction and it measures it. Just as an aperture restricts the flow of light, an aperture can restrict/define the flow and direction of an interaction. All interactions have magnitude and energy to them. Thus, they are all also more chaotic and thus they are also more chaotic or orderly, given how much energy flows through them. The interactions of particles at the sun's core carry much more energy and are more chaotic and cause experience time to flow differently than in a lone particle in dead space. We can study the interactions between sun particles, the aperture of two particles interacting, versus the interaction of that lone particle in space with the faint gravity the particle feels. So, apertures of many variables. In the aperture, we can use concepts of pressure, heat, volume, etc. to measure interactions. In pure mathematics, an aperture is similar to the definition of a set. Sets in math are collections of elements. When we study emergence, we will study how large volume apertures hold smaller apertures inside them, going deeper into the base interactions, emerging infinite possibilities. Finally, an aperture does not have to be a 2D plane constricting a 3D line. So say we have a line in 3D, and the plane would be kind of intersecting the line, and the circle, the aperture, goes around the line. So, finally, an aperture does not have to be a 2D plane constraining a 3D line, as one might visualize light flowing through a hole. Instead, if time flows as the fourth dimension, then apertures are three-dimensional, constraining an object space. If we go by the mathematical definition of a set, then an aperture, taking on the definition of a set, can simply be any group of elements or objects. My home is an aperture. A city, an apple, or any object is an aperture, grouping a set of more minor interactions. Any category can be an aperture describing a set of things. The grouping effect is the beginning of emergence, our next category. So, now we move on to emergence. As we continue to the next pillar of the universal model, our apertures are beginning to look quite complex. They are emerging into chaotic and orderly patterns. The chaos and order in the aperture category interact to form the concepts within emergence. For example, a bit of order in a large swath of chaos is a novelty. So you have lots of order, and then a little bit of chaos pops in. That's novelty. There is poetry in how the subconcepts of emergence emerge from aperture to make emergence. Sorry for the tongue twister. These concepts include, but are by no means limited to, entropy, novelty, boundaries, hierarchies, and complexity, just to name a few. Hierarchies describe the increasing complexity and magnitude of systems. Boundaries form when order prevents chaos from spreading. Novelty, as described earlier, is spurts of order within chaos. Entropy is the tendency of a system to be more chaotic over time, because chaos is the most likely outcome of any system. Add in the structure that interactions give, use boundaries to move information, and emergence can create endless categories within itself. There is an issue with my categories relating to emergence and aperture. I'm not sure where to fit chaos and order necessarily, whether it belongs in the aperture category or is simply a product of emergence. Either way, this predicament exposes the obvious. The universe does not strictly follow this 6-category rule. However, the 6 categories are a good starting point to explain this massive hypothesis, whether true or not. We can reshuffle the ideas in the future and revise the universal model once the ideas presented are out in the wild and open to discussion. So, with that, we come to the 5th category, one of my favorites, life. Life is another intrinsic topic I believe is key to understanding the universe. According to the universal model, life is any system that manages to continue its existence in some form. Thus, death is the ending of a perpetuating system. A little water. This definition leaves many open interpretations for defining if something is living. Animals, plants, people, and cells are all life forms since they are systems that continue their existence or reproduce to continue the species' existence. We can also all die. However, is an atom a life form then? The same physics that run atoms are the same physics that run humans. The neutrons and protons of an atom use the strong nuclear force to hold the atom together. An atom can die once the neutrons and protons rip apart. So, why is the atomic life form different from a human as a life form? Are cells and humans on the same level of life? The concept of emergence actually answers this question. No longer will something have to be organic to be considered a life form. Given our definition of life, each interaction, no, even if, my bad, even interactions are life forms as long as the interaction lasts longer than 0 seconds. An interaction's continuous nature keeps the transfer of data existing over time. The nature of consciousness, no, the nature of continuousness is the fundamental component of perpetuation. Therefore, instead of defining humans as life and atoms as never alive, we must think of life in stages and as a spectrum. Just as water can go from solid to liquid to gas, can apertures/systems/objects go from stages of life. We can sort these stages roughly for the time being. And now, little side note. These stages are not concrete necessarily. They're just milestones for our understanding right now. As the science progresses for the model and the definitions become clearer, we'll have different types of life forms. So here's some of the basic ones that I decided to start with. Stage 0 life forms. Simple matter. Particles and matter that simply continue to exist are the building blocks of reproductive life, and this is stage 0. Anything with minimal complexity, not necessarily evolved to perpetuate existence, that's the key, not necessarily evolved, is considered a stage 0. Stage 1 includes cells, viruses, ideas, self-sufficient factories, and anything that simply reproduces is around a stage 1 level. Stage 0s construct stage 1s. Just as a cell is made of atoms, even a tornado may be self-sustaining and thus is a low-end stage 1. Another definition for stage 1 is anything that is a basic reproducer/perpetuator that underwent some form of evolutionary process. An atom did not necessarily evolve to the level that we define evolution, thus it is stuck at stage 0. So, stage 2s are kind of vague. I needed something in the middle between stage 3s and stage 2s, but stage 2s are probably a lot more complex. Stage 1s construct stage 2s. It consists of lesser conscious things. A stage 2 can be a tree, small ant, an organ, simple company, or many other combinations of stage 1s. When multiple stage 1s combine with differentiating jobs, they often transition into stage 2. So overall, stage 2 is like multicellular. Not necessarily like aware of its own existence, but it's a lot more complicated than stage 1. So now here's the more important category, stage 3s. Stage 3s feature a highly increased level of consciousness within interacting stage 2s, kind of like a breaking point. The organ/stage 2 parts form a higher stage being, a dog, ant colony, human, very advanced computer AI, dolphin, and more can all be considered a stage 3. In the case of just a brain, it may seem like an artificial intelligence brain is just the stage 1s put together. But if artificial intelligence has enough intricate systems like visual processing, linguistics, creativity, and it is made up of many stage 2s, then it slowly becomes a stage 3. Our vision forms from stage 2 level ideas, even in mental processing. These ideas combine so intricately that we experience stage 3 consciousness. Now, a little side note. What I mean by stage 2 concepts is like being able to identify objects within our existence. And then all those objects come together with our different senses. Each sense is like a different stage 2 to form a stage 3 existence. So now we move on to stage 4s. Stage 4s are highly relevant to our future. Animals, people, and technology work together to form stage 4 life forms. Our civilization is a grand stage 4. A species is a very loose stage 4, maybe, depending on how the species works. Any company is stage 4 since it comprises stage 3 humans and can live, die, evolve, and perform other analogous biological functions. Countries and religions are also stage 4s. And by stage 4, the idea of concrete stages dissolves and becomes a spectrum of complexities and various forms of consciousness. And I think it's in these life categories that we'll really find some of the coolest categorizations of conscious experience. Because we can categorize conscious experiences, like colors and other things, as relative to each other. So now stage 5. Some of the things I'm saying aren't in the book, but I think they're valuable information, give them updated knowledge on the model. So yeah, stage 5. Religions heavily apply to this stage. A stage 5 may consist of the whole universe itself. I'm not sure how this would manifest besides combining all stage 4s together. Religious freedom is heavily supported in this stage since we cannot perceive stage 5s easily. Perhaps only stage 4s can grasp the grander scope of stage 5s. A god may be considered stage 5. Who knows? Leaves open the possibility, because if everything is conscious on some level and everything's connected, religions can make their arguments that gods exist. And that gets even weirder when we start considering companies and these other grand projects as grander than just a stage 3. I see no reason why there couldn't be a possible overarching consciousness. Not sure it would be fully omnipotent though, given differing free wills. That last little section was not in the book, guys, sorry. So, here's continuation of the life category. I know this video is getting long, but it's good to have this book recorded online. In reality, life is not subject to just stages. It is a continuous transition. However, once we can map estimated stages to rough equations, we can create equations using concepts from emergence to calculate all life forms' complexity, consciousness, and other essential properties. Imagine if forests were as alive as a human mind, but we could not know until we knew the exact math behind our minds to understand the mind of a forest. That is why I decided to start with stages. Understanding the precise stage of life of every object and system is vital to humanity being the stewards of Earth. Also, different stage types will still be a helpful concept given the diverse nature of life forms. Just as our mind can go from sleep to awake to stimulated by drugs, so can a group of water molecules go from ice to water to vapor. And in the end, no idea is off the table. Now we get to the big category that started it all. Consciousness. Under the universal model, the entire universe is conscious on some level. Everything from an atom to a civilization experiences consciousness. So how can we prove everything is conscious? First off, this category started my interest in the Universal Model project. If we explain everything in our world through math and science, why cannot consciousness use math and science? Thus, all the previous 5 categories combine to form the math behind consciousness. We must also define consciousness in the scope of these papers. Consciousness is the feeling of existence and mental experience of the world. It is not only defined as a high amount of self-awareness. It is not just self-awareness. It is the feeling of existence and a mental experience of the world. Just to restate that again. A simple starting rule is that consciousness is proportional to the stage of the life form. A complex stage, stage 3 life form, such as a human, is highly conscious. Meanwhile, while still alive, a mouse has a less complex brain and likely less complex experience of the world. We'll use a basic pattern to prove that everything is conscious. Is a creature half as complex as a mouse conscious if the mouse is conscious? Philosophy is often asked, what point does an organism cease being conscious? The framing of this question is a terrible precedent. We cannot think of the world as conscious or not conscious. Instead, the complexity of consciousness lies within the continuums, as emphasized earlier. A continuum is the most common measurement form in the universe, from temperature to time. An atom is billions of times less conscious than a human, but still lies on the continuum of consciousness. A quick thought experiment can lead us toward potential proof. If I remove one neuron from my mind, I will feel almost no different. Repeat this process 1,000 times, and my world experience will be a small percent less complex. If we repeat this until my brain is a few neurons, I may only experience 1 pixel of light. However, I will still be experiencing the universe in some fashion. Going towards simpler minds leads us to cells and matter. If we describe consciousness as a repetitive pattern or a loop of thought, then a system of 2 interactions going back and forth can be considered conscious. Every interaction being affected by each other forms the most basic sentience. Thus, every interaction is conscious on some level. Even material matter is just a set of interactions, an aperture, where the material experience of a particle occurs whenever an interaction occurs. We can tell consciousness is topological too. Topology is a form of geometric study where the objects can morph, but their properties stay the same. Thus, now I'll need to write some proofs for the topology of it, but based on the structures, it's seeming to be topological. Thus, a mind can take many shapes. Instead of just feeling our mind's interior thoughts, we feel our whole bodies as a shape of senses. A human's topology has a dense mind with thin tendrils of neurons in our limbs. Meanwhile, an octopus has a constant density of neurons, creating a brain in the shape of the animal. The sensory experience forms the shapes of the senses they inhabit, if the brain structures it so. Overall, consciousness is present in everything, from the edge of an atom to the brain of an octopus. According to the universal model, the entire universe is alive. So, now we move on to a universal model study example. Arguably one of the most important combinations of categories is the link between consciousness and time. So, let me go back to the hexagonal loops. We got time, interactions, apertures, emergence, life, consciousness, leads back to time. Categories loop back on each other, completing the hexagonal ring of the core pillars. Consciousness, material existence, and time are directly related. As of now, I call this the time-consciousness-matter argument. Conscious speed determines time's experience speed and vice versa. If our neurons fire twice as fast, then time for us slows to half speed. If we compute events slower, time runs faster. The pattern is an inverse proportion. We can graph these relations and many other similar equations to turn consciousness into a quantifiable science. Now we can hypothesize different scenarios. We assume that all interactions are conscious on some level. So what happens when the speed of neurons becomes infinitely fast? Using this inverse proportionality, we can estimate what will happen. If time's speed approaches infinity, then the conscious experience of the universe approaches zero, or at a complete standstill if everything happens at once. Thus, if our neurons fire infinitely fast, then all of experienced time freezes for us. The entire world will freeze. Now, we can do the opposite. If our neurons slow to zero, infinitely slow, the universe will go by infinitely fast. Fun fact, this is how photons are predicted to actually experience the universe due to Einstein's general relativity. Now comes the matter section of the argument. The most basic form of matter is a particle. We can argue how waves fit into the equations, but that's a discussion for another day with the experts. In the meantime, we can use philosophical questions to answer how particles and matter have material properties. A common philosophical question is, what causes the material existence of matter? Why does the universe have matter in the first place? According to the model, the physical matter arises from the interactions. If a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, does it fall at all? Yes, of course it did, since there's an entire forest interacting relative to and with the tree. However, a particle moving through empty space, never interacting with another particle, also in this presumed universe there is no gravity, will experience no change in its existence. Since there is no interactive change, it will not experience any conscious change. Conscious as in experiential change. To the particle, the universe is constant. It is similar to air and wind against human skin. We do not feel the presence of air when it is still, but when air decides to slam against our body, we feel the effect of wind. This logic leads us to the hypothesis that consciousness only arises when two things interact. Furthermore, the interaction must be continuous to take time, since an infinitely fast interaction will cause zero conscious experience. Now, a little side note on the physics I've been exploring. These infinities are actually really important because in the newer physics I've been working on, in order to run this universe, I've made axioms that state that the universe has to have a calculator, and with these axioms, we get these other conscious equations where things have to exist to experience, and it gets weird. It gets fun. So, moving on. Let me check how many pages we have left. Okay, 2.5 pages. I only have so much data left to record on my phone. So, more proof of this elementary explanation is in the following paper, Consciousness in the Universal Model. An example of a more curious pattern to study is in the future is consciousness related to gravity. Since gravity can warp speed and time, and consciousness defines the speed of experienced time, then maybe the two are related through complexity or the amount of matter. These possibilities are hypothetical, though, so we will discuss this later. This discussion on consciousness barely scratches the surface. We only describe consciousness concerning time and interactions. Later, we will discuss how apertures define the location and topology of consciousness. Emergence will define the complexity and type of consciousness. Then life forms define consciousness timelines and act as fuel for continuing consciousness. Every category interacts with one or more other categories in exciting ways, revealing new ways to view the universe and uncovering beautiful truths that we can use to better our lives and better the universe. So, on that, another side note, on that consciousness and gravity note, in the recent physics, the whole question was, in potential explanations for quantum mechanics and gravity, could consciousness be lurking in there? And I believe the answer is yes. And I think I found where it lurks. And it's really cool. Because when the universe has to be a calculator, it has to send information in systems to themselves. And then it has to send information outward. And the sending information in on oneself creates inner experience. And the sending of information outward creates kind of sensory experience. And it's still kind of weird. But basically, concepts of inner and outer, that thin line creates like a material existence. And in the inner structures, that's quantum mechanics. And in the outer structures, sending information to other systems to manage the calculations behind the interactions is at a constant speed of light. And a constant speed of light then causes gravity. So when gravity is managing the interactions between outward systems, and quantum mechanics and calculating all possibilities is managing inside systems, when those two systems try and do calculations on one another, consciousness is forced to pop into existence, because the paradoxical structure of consciousness shares the same paradoxical structure as these overwrite equations that are writing on themselves. And with the paradox, the universe says, how do I solve this one paradox? Well, we'll bring this other paradox into existence. That paradox is matter. Boom. It's weird. I need to go back to my notes and find exactly what I was saying, because they're a little lost right now, 2 months old. And lots of the argument is probably wrong. But the idea of overriding information and having information be forced to send it outwards and interact is key. So now on to the final section of this paper. Faults and conclusion. There are likely many faults within the hypotheses of my essays, concepts soon to be revealed and assumptions made. However, we can use the ideas in these papers to create a springboard for future discoveries and discussion. One sizable potential fault is the disorganization of the main 6 categories. The categories could be wrong. 2 categories may need merging, a category may need separating, or the idea of categories could be generally wrong, and could just be generally wrong. My bad for stumbling there. As stated earlier, the likely organization of the patterns of the universe follows no categories and uses continuums. The categories of the model flow seemingly into the next, just like a continuum. Just as life's complexity ties into emergence, it is also tied to time, interactions, and every other concept of the model. All concepts of the universal model come together to form our universe. Heck, other universes may even use other universal models that we can't even think of. Concepts such as interactions or consciousness may be non-existent in ways we cannot comprehend. That is one reason why we must fully map out our universe. Luckily, we have already studied most of the concepts I described in this paper. The most scientific study of how things interact is more commonly known as physics, the study of how people interact, sociology, how neurons interact, psychology, study of life forms, biology, study of consciousness, religion, and philosophy. To reiterate, the universal model is a metaphysics theory with 6 core pillars that act with circular logic. The model is much more development than just the 6 concepts listed here. In later papers, we will study the developmental evolution of the model, hypothesis of consciousness, real-world applications, future-world applications, and the impact on society of the model. Always keep in mind that we live in one universe with a set of rules. We experience a conscious reality, which intertwines with everything around us. If we are indeed to get to the true meaning of the universe, then we must organize our theories under one ever-changing umbrella. That is the purpose of the universal model. I hope you found this information helpful, and thanks for listening. And then it also just says, feel free to contact me or visit JHR Innovators for more information on the model. Yeah, as you see, I think in the past my thoughts were a bit more organized. But that's what happens when you're forced to write everything down. That's why I'm doing these vlogs. Because now, the ideas are coming back to me. In the past month, I lost quarter to a third of the ideas in this paper. But now I feel back on track, so this is good. And I'll try and get more formal writing for my other thoughts down. Because I think we're ready to start writing some cool philosophy. So, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.